Hello again. This week, going to look at Hobbii's Advent calendar for week 2. We're going to take a look at the yarns, at the pattern. I'm going to reveal and review my experience with actually making the project included in this week's calendar. Hi, my name is Sig, and this is Essential Crochet, and you, of course, are always welcomed here. Now, quickly, I'd like to ask you to hit the subscribe bar, notification bell, and like buttons. And then let's just go ahead and move on to what you're actually here for, and that is for the Hobbii Advent calendar week 2. Now, as mentioned in the earlier Hobbii Advent calendar where I unboxed, revealed, and reviewed all the contents of all the weeks before the patterns came out, I am now going to do each individual week by itself. I'm going to show you the yarn once again, and then also the pattern, and then we're going to jump ahead and discuss what it was like for me to actually work up the project, and you will get to see the finished product. So stick to the end for that. First off, let's take a look at the yarn for week 2. So we've got this Friends 8/4 cotton yarn, 100% cotton. It's a super fine. This yarn is made in India, and it is distributed by Hobbii out of Denmark. So this is our first color, and I believe the colorways of these are just going by numbers. So yeah, this is colorway number 9. And then let me see what other colors we have. Okay, so we've got this kind of dark plumish color. I don't know how well that's showing up there on your computer. I think it might look more brown than kind of this plum. And this colorway is colorway 6. A nice creamy color with the colorway of 3. Next colorway is kind of this periwinkle color, and this is colorway 83. And then our last but not least is going to be a kind of, I don't know, it looks kind of like a clay color with a sort of muted, earthy, kind of pinky reddish undertone. Yeah, that's kind of a long way to describe it. But I'm trying to think of what better to compare this color to, and I'm just not coming up with anything right off the top of my head. So this colorway is 37, and I can see how these 3 colors right here look great together. They're very complementary of each other. Take the 4th, which would be this cream color, and that's gorgeous. And then you throw in the periwinkle. Now, the periwinkle is really sharing the same value, but the hue, of course, is different, and it adds a beautiful contrast to the other 4 colors. It adds that little extra bit of interest. So I really like the color choices in this project we're having this time around. Now, being a super fine yarn, we're going to need a small hook, and of course this time around it's going to be a 3.25 millimeter hook, and in US terms this is approximately a size D hook. Next, we're going to want a tapestry needle and a pair of scissors. So Hobbii supplied us with all of these. I know it gave us some plastic yarn needles in our advent calendar. I suppose you could use that instead of a regular tapestry needle. But personally, I prefer a nice metal needle to the plastic one, so I will just use my own needle. And then finally, this is an image of the project we are doing this week. Now, quickly, let me share what the knitting side of things had in their advent calendar. So the first week, and I didn't talk about this last week, but I'll talk about it this week. We'll kind of play catch up a little bit if you'll allow me that bit of indulgence. So the first week of the knitting side of things was, of course, this little shawlette. The colors are quite neutral. They're pretty. It's nice. And while I don't knit, looking at this piece, I assume this is a good, solid beginner piece. Let me know if I'm wrong. I mean, like I said, I don't knit, so I don't know, but I thought I'd throw this up there too, just to contrast the two different Advent calendars, crochet versus knitting, that came for this 2024 season. So here you can see is the shawl, and then right next to it is the beanie, the winterberry beanie for the crochet side of things. Now next, we have this primrose tea towel piece for our crochet side, for those of us who have the crochet Advent calendar. And for those who have the knitting Advent calendar, we have, or rather I should say they have, these really pretty, almost romantic feeling fingerless gloves. So I hope the comparison and contrast of the knitting Advent calendar compared to the crocheting calendar was of interest to you. It's kind of interesting to me, so I thought I'd share that, just so anyone who hasn't purchased this calendar this year gets a feel for what it is that's being offered. So maybe next year, if you're considering it, you get a better feel for what's coming down the pipe for you, or what you can expect from Hobbii. So now let's come back here and discuss the crochet pattern this time, because this is what you're really here for, right? So anyways, so this is the Primrose Tea Towel, as mentioned, and the design is by TL Yarn Crafts. So basically, Tony is the person who designed the Winterberry beanie, and so she is also the designer of this tea towel. And the tea towel itself is going to be an inset mosaic technique. Now, I'm personally really excited about this because I've never done this particular technique before, or not like this. I have done aspects and elements of this technique, but I have not done like a full piece that's just focused basically on inset mosaic stitching. And so this is really quite new to me in many respects. And I'm looking forward to seeing how it turns out and sharing my thoughts and opinions. And while it's going to be a few hours for me, it's only going to be a moment for you. So stick around and I will show you what I end up with. So the pattern was for a tea towel, right? With this great inset mosaic pattern. And you get enough yarn to do one tea towel. And of course, the little bit of border that you get with it. Well, I wanted 2 tea towels, and I was hoping that I could just barely work the yarn, and I did. In fact, I used all the yarn except for this. This yarn was all I had left. So my goal was to use just the yarn that came with this week's project and to make it work in as cohesive as a manner. And I didn't quite do that, and I'll tell you why. So there was one little section, one little blue section that was probably, I was playing yarn chicken and I lost in a couple of locations, but this one particular location was the one location where I actually had to go into my own personal stash and try to find a color that was maybe similar or at least on the same value system. And because I didn't have anything that was periwinkle, but it needed to be, of course, it needed to be the right weight, which was a super fine. It needed to be a periwinkle color, and it needed to be cotton. Well, so I went into my stash to see if I could find something, and the closest thing I could find, cotton yarn that was a super fine, and it was kind of a variegated. So the blue itself is a little darker than the periwinkle, but it was kind of speckled with sort of a lighter color worked into it. So it gives it a close enough effect to the periwinkle I've been using with, close enough for government work, right? However, the problem with that yarn is that it's variegated, and so it goes into kind of this beautiful speckled green bit. So I have this little bit of green off in the corner, because really what I needed about 25 inches of yarn that I could that I could tie in so I could finish the very last row of blue on this second tea towel. So that was the only yarn that I added in from my stash. Everything else for both of these tea towels did come from the yarn that was provided. And then, of course, there was another location where I had to place some yarn chicken again. And with these tea towels, what I did was I calculated about how much yarn I had, and then I decided to do something a little different for the border than what was actually indicated in the pattern. And so I did these little window cutouts. I did a couple of extra rounds in the various colors that we had. And then, of course, up here in this section of my towel on this particular tea towel, as you can see, this is the second tea towel that I made. I found myself playing yarn chicken again.
Oh my God.
I had to pick up this more toffee colored yarn because it was at this point that I just ran out of this more clayish color yarn. And so I had to finish up this row with the new color yarn. So that was about it. And, and as far as I'm concerned, that's okay because everything just sort of blends in really well with this pattern anyways. I am really happy with this pattern. This pattern did take some paying attention. So here's an image.
Uh-oh.
I was doing my thing on Sunday. I was, it wasn't until late Sunday evening when I actually got a chance to sit down and start working on this project. And then I got distracted several times. And when I came back to my work, I realized that somehow I had totally messed up the count on several rows. And as you can see in this image, yeah. So I had to do a little ribbiting. And so once I frogged all that out and restarted again, it still took a little time. It still took me a couple of, days. I had stuff to do as well, but every chance I had, I sat down to work on these. It still took me a couple of days to get these made up because of the inset mosaic design. It takes a little paying closer attention to the pattern because the pattern does shift a couple of times before the whole thing repeats again. And so you kind of have to slow your work down a little bit, but that's okay because I am very happy that Hobbii is not treating this advent calendar in a way that makes you feel like your intelligence is being, how do I say it, underestimated. And what do I mean by that? Well, of course, we've got beginners, right? And this pattern was set up really nicely to be beginner friendly, actually, right? Between the pattern and then I also watched the video because this is a stitch that I wasn't very familiar with. So I wanted to watch the video to see, just to make sure that I understood what I was doing. And with the way the video was set up and the ease and clarity of this pattern, even if you were a beginner and you slowed way down in order to work this project, you would be able to do it, right? And then for people who are a little more advanced, this is really a nice project to get. So this week's project, I have to say, was another W as well. It was a total win in my book so far. It's 2-0 for Hobbii. And if things keep up like this, I'm definitely getting another one of these advent calendars for next year. Okay, guys, thanks for joining me. I will see you again next week for the revealing of the third pattern for Hobbii 2024 Advent Calendar Reveal.